This is a medieval combat video review, analysis of SCA combat. This is from the Spring 2018 Crown Tournament held in March, the second of two tournaments in which Duke Agrippa eventually found victory. So what we're going to do is go through this video. We're going to sort of watch exchanges at speed, and then we'll go through again in slow motion and break down the combat in detail as appropriate. There are a few things to know about SCA combat before really diving in here. One is that it is an honor system, so you call the blows that you receive yourself. The judges don't decide for you. And a single hard blow to the head or body is considered effective at ending the fight. A hard blow to the arm or leg disables that limb, and from the knees down and from the wrists to the hands is invulnerable. You can get more details on how SCA combat works elsewhere. There's also no grappling, and there's a lot of rules for, honor and chivalry and things like that. So, without getting too much into those things, let's move on and start an analysis. The other thing I should point out is that there were two Crown tournaments in back-to-back days. This is the second of those tournaments, so this is the one that was held on the Sunday. Alright, so let's jump in. And here we go, all the way back to the beginning of the fight. I should apologize in advance. At one point my view got blocked when I was recording this video, so we don't get a great view of the end of the first fight here. This is also going to be best 2 out of 3. Right off the bat, we notice a couple things with these two fighters. Agrippa is a little taller. They're both right-handed. Agrippa's got a taller oval shield that is center-mounted, so he's holding it in his hand. Duke Patrick has a arm-strapped heater shield, it's called. There's advantages and disadvantages of each style. Agrippa's sword is just a little bit longer than Duke Patrick's, and Agrippa's sword is allowed to stab or thrust, and Duke Patrick's is not. Other things that we're noticing, Agrippa is pretty fluidly moving between which of his feet he puts in front and in back. Right now he's fighting with a sword leg back stance. Duke Patrick is mostly fighting sword leg forward at this point, although you can see he sort of fluidly changes as well. Duke Patrick's stance is, having seen him do a lot of fighting that day, a little bit different than it is against other opponents, so he's adjusted his style to better match up against Duke Agrippa. And you can see that Duke Agrippa is slowly giving ground, Duke Patrick is slowly taking ground. So, we can see that Agrippa's sort of main strategy here is to stay at range where his longer sword gets some benefit, and Duke Patrick's strategy appears to be to close ground slowly, keeping himself very well protected. So, if we look past their armaments and physiques, there's the things that these guys might be known for. They're both top-end fighters, so they've got reputations that they've earned for their particular skills and techniques. Duke Patrick is a solid tactician, very tight defense, hits with power, does a lot of edge work and a lot of really interesting fakes and body motions. Duke Agrippa is known to be one of the best stabbers in the organization, so although he uses the edge quite a lot, as you can see, his thrust is perhaps the most accurate and deadly in the kingdom. So Duke Patrick's got to guard himself against those thrusts. So we can see the beginning of the fight playing out with lots of exchanges, and there's pretty good humor between the two combatants as well. Again, we're going to let this fight run through, and then we'll go through and break this first bout down. I think I mentioned earlier this is a best 2 out of 3 final. Okay, and here what I'm going to do is skip ahead. Duke Patrick's been hitting the leg, so he drops to his knees. Unfortunately, at this point, the marshal, a really good dude, is courteous enough to kneel down so that people can see very well. I happen to be low to the ground because there's people behind me, so my camera view is not great at this point. There's a lot of attempts for me to shuffle the camera around. I apologize. So at this point, Duke Patrick is fighting from his knees. Duke Agrippa, as a matter of courtesy, is not allowed to face him into the sun or circle around him outside of range. Jump in and knock him over. Also in Caid, you're not allowed to step too close to your opponent, really crowd them, and then throw multiple blows. You can step in really close and throw one, but you can't throw many. Got other questions like, why not just kick the guy over? It's sort of against the rules, so you're only really allowed to strike each other's weapons and shields with your weapon. it gets a little complicated, but the short version is you're not allowed to just boot the guy over. So here we can see Duke Agrippa is fighting at pretty long range. Duke Patrick is not really closing with him. He can move on his knees. Apologies about the camera work. And that was the killing blow. So again, I apologize I couldn't get a better view. So let's go back and break down that fight in sequence. First of these matches. Alright, so right off the bat we notice that they settle into Agrippa's range. And as Patrick advances, watch, Agrippa's maintaining almost exactly the same distance. The camera work will make it a little difficult to tell, but if you just draw this line, we'll see that it doesn't tend to get a lot closer than that. Now, unfortunately, again, it's not going to work because Agrippa is rotating to the right, which is what most right-handers will do against other right-handers. But he maintains his range really carefully, and Duke Patrick is not just charging in. Duke Patrick's shield is in this sort of orientation that's sort of guarding his face really well against that thrust. That does expose his legs, but at this kind of range, if Agrippa throws for the legs, he's probably going to have to lean or step in or wait for Patrick to move in, and Patrick's got the opportunity to drop the shield first. So at this range, the shortest distance between Agrippa's hand and his target is the head on Patrick, because that's the height of Agrippa's shoulder. So he would be giving up range to go after that leg. So you won't see Agrippa throw for those legs that are presently exposed unless the range shortens some. You'll also notice that both of them are pretty stable with their footing. And you'll see Agrippa do a lot of little moves like this one here. It looks like a little bit of a throw. He's getting Duke Patrick to move, but what he's trying to do is get a thrust. Duke Patrick is running the math right now. You can sort of see his battle computer thinking, okay, what angles does he have? How do I guard against that thrust? Because that's the real threat unless he fakes a thrust and steps in with a chop or something. So Agrippa is now moving the sword around, looking for targets, doesn't see one. Duke Patrick moves back, they both reset, right? So we see a lot of this, and you see sort of like a nod right here. I love this little bit. So if we go through this in slow motion, watch for the nod after it's done. Yeah, we're playing a mind game here. So they played a couple rounds of chess right there and said, okay, I acknowledge that you saw that, right? So the other thing that we'll notice, you can't see it really easily with the camera here, but Agrippa's defense has his shield canted over to his right, so he's guarding his sword arm, allowing his sword arm to be out in front of him more. That gets him a little closer on the thrust. That means he's starting from a little closer to his opponent, right? So Agrippa's sword is here. Some people start with the guard all the way behind their shoulder, so they're already wound up to throw a heavy shot. Some people start with their guard right about there, so Agrippa's got some range there, and he's using the diagonal angle of that shield to cover himself. And that basket and sword also provide some protection to his head. Now, you'll notice every time Patrick takes a little step forward, Agrippa's taking a step back. This is an offside shot that's not really meant as a threat. Agrippa knows it's not going to land. What he's doing is trying to get a reaction out of Patrick, so maybe he can follow up with a thrust. And you'll see Agrippa's hand often recovers into sort of like a knuckles down position, getting ready to thrust, looking for an angle around the shield, almost like a fencer would do disengages. And even down here, that thrust can come up really quickly, so Patrick's staying guarded. At that point, the thrust is now no longer a threat. Reset. So we see a lot of this. They're playing a very tactical game, maintaining very close distance. Duke Patrick does not want to rush in and get a surprise thrust in the face. Now Duke Patrick has managed to close a half step of distance. Now they are in range. So Agrippa begins to throw. This is a shot directly into the shield, just to keep Duke Patrick busy, knowing that he can bounce off that shield and potentially open a thrust. So he's looking for a place to land that thrust. Duke Patrick pushes the edge of his shield sort of away from the camera just a little bit, and now he pounces. So what he's trying to do is push that thrust so it'll miss the right side of Duke Patrick's body. And Duke Patrick comes in with an attempt to strike at the head. And another thing you'll notice is Duke Patrick's sword is changing angles a lot. At this point, it's not super clear. If we go back just a couple frames, here, Duke Patrick could be throwing to the left side of Agrippa's head. He could be throwing to the right side of Agrippa's head. Now it's rotating, so it could be a slot shot coming straight down vertically around the near side of Agrippa's shield. and it ends up being a shot, a hard power shot right into Agrippa's shield because there's no really good openings. Now their hands are past each other, and as Duke Patrick springs in, what he's going to do, what he's going to hope is that that hard shot into Agrippa's shield has bound his shield up and created some openings. He's also getting well past Patrick's tip. Agrippa's now trying to recover. He does a really interesting recovery up over Duke Patrick's head. And you can see Agrippa's shield still moving. It's one of the disadvantages of a center grip shield. You get a lot more mobility out of them. You can do interesting things with them. You can move them into interesting places. But they tend to get knocked around a lot more. And Duke Patrick doesn't hit lightly. Pressing on. And I don't know that we necessarily need to go through this in such painstaking detail, but it's just such a delight to watch these fighters work. Duke Patrick recovers for a slash across the body, and Agrippa's using range to keep out. And if we look, it's a good thing Agrippa doesn't raise his arm right here because it just misses. Now here Agrippa's sword is in a great position for a groin thrust. In Caid, it's illegal to aim at the groin on purpose. So it might be that it's because he's making his backwards motion, or he doesn't want to throw for the groin, or it's simply that he's a little blind. They're both behind their shields at this point, so they can't be 100% sure what the other person is doing. So Agrippa gets out. Duke Patrick does a really big recovery, and he's going for another big power shot. And in this case, he sees that the opportunity isn't there, so he spells it off. And that's one of the big differences we see between really high-end fighters and sort of mid-level fighters. When mid-level fighters get really wound up for a shot, they're probably going to throw it regardless. Duke Patrick realizes that target isn't there. Agrippa has rotated towards the camera with his footwork and is no longer in the position that he was when Duke Patrick was wound up for that shot. So Patrick would have to kind of rotate 45 or 90 degrees to the left just to be able to hit him, because Agrippa's continuing to circle, and as you can see, he's moving fast. Now it makes, as he's on the backup, this is really, I'm going backwards a little bit. Now moving forwards again, Agrippa is moving backwards and both his feet off the ground. So he's moving really quick, but still laser precise thrust, right? And it comes from well below the shield. So you'll notice that the thrust doesn't go like that, right? Straight. It starts at this angle, goes into this angle, and ends up here. Now Duke Patrick, as you can see, is throwing the brakes on. He's pulled his hips back, which is the best way to stop your forward movement without going way off balance. And he's doing everything he can not to get into that thrust. And Agrippa's thrust was hidden behind Patrick's shield a moment ago. So laser precise thrust while both of them are on the move, and look at that. Ooh, almost. And if you look, Agrippa's arm is at full extension, right? So Caid is a positive touch to the face kingdom. What that means is we're presumed to have basically naked faces. So a stab to the face, even if it's pretty light, is considered good enough. And this is very, very close to ending the fight, but just out of range because Duke Patrick has stopped all of his forward momentum. Just a matter of millimeters. It's really such a treat to watch this stuff. And if we watch that at speed, let's just watch that again. We just spent, 5 minutes breaking that down. And Agrippa is always having a good time with the fight, complimenting Duke Patrick for getting stopped there. So these guys' battle computers are working at a speed. It takes me 5 minutes to break down, and they're just doing this in the moment. And we're going to see a lot more exchanges like that. So I'm going to relatively quickly power forward. There's an offside is really attempting to open a thrust. We see another thrust or two. So if we go back and just watch this exchange a little at a time. So it didn't make a noise, but this first shot from Agrippa looks like an offside. Looks like it's going to come in and bang against Duke Patrick's basket, but actually threads the needle, gets it right between the shield and sword, and thrusts. Doesn't quite get to the face. Probably Duke Patrick's basket blocks it. And then the second one, another threat. This one's not necessarily going to hit him, but bang, now Patrick's got to deal with that. The corner of the shield's been moved in front of Patrick's face. And this is an angle you don't often see people stabbing from, with the knuckles sort of rolled 45 degrees towards the camera, sort of at like what I'd say is like a 7 o'clock rotation, and a thrust up and forward, just a reciprocating thrust. But that forces Patrick to sort of bobble up. Now what he does is move the shield forward after that, and Agrippa's not in a great position with his weapon to take advantage of that. Now Duke Patrick sees his opportunity to come in. Another power shot into the shield. Now this time, Duke Agrippa, even though he's blind, senses an opportunity. He's stabbing for Duke Patrick's stomach, but as you see, Duke Patrick is moving up and off the ground. So Duke Patrick's moving up, and the thrust looks like it lands behind the shield, maybe in the groin. At this point, you can see Agrippa can see. He's been able to see for a moment, right? You can see that it's probably, oops, headed towards the groin. So what I would suspect is going on at this point is Agrippa says, oh crap, I'm about to stab someone in the groin. It's not allowed. It's also not polite. I don't think it's something you would do on purpose. So he's probably doing everything he can to take power off of that shot. Notice that his arm from the shoulder is a long ways from 180 degrees, so he could theoretically straighten that arm and punch out much harder. And Agrippa can, as one of the best stabbers in the SCA, can drive a hard thrust. But you see he just sort of stops. There's a little bit of jab on it, but it looks like he's trying to back out, and see at this point you see he's actually pulling the thrust back. And at this point an offside from Duke Patrick comes in and just tags. You can see it skimming just down the front of Agrippa's shoulder and breastplate. Now at this point neither of them feel that was hard enough. Maybe that shot actually, instead of hitting in the groin, hit just above Duke Patrick's belt. He says the thrust wasn't there, and Agrippa's like, yeah, I was backing out. Your shot wasn't hard enough either. So Agrippa asks about the face. Not sure if that was his face, like, hey, about that skipping shot, or about a sort of thrust towards Duke Patrick. Duke Patrick says, hey, I don't even think I hit you. Fight continues. So yeah, we'll continue at full speed for a little bit before diving in, because again, I could go into every little frame on these guys. Ah, see, and I want to do it again right away. No self-discipline. This is interesting. Agrippa drops fast to threaten a corkscrew thrust to the stomach, where he's going to go around the edge of the shield and stab in the stomach. And you see his body drops. The shield comes up. But in fact, that's a feint, and you see Duke Patrick's shield has to respond. And it's so fast, now Agrippa's thrust comes in, and Duke Patrick is able to turn his head and get his basket in the way, brings the shield up as extra defense and to cover the sword. So really, really cool move. A lot of people just throw their shield down and get jacked in the face. Duke Patrick's able to block with a sword while guarding against the feint with his shield. I should say I think it's a fake. I think that first stab is a fake, because it's really hard to feint with a thrust. So a feint is something that you will finish the attack if it could kill. And if it can't, then you do something else. A fake is when you do something you never intend to actually throw. So I think this one's a fake instead of a feint. You can see that just sort of glances off the side. Now, again, Duke Patrick, my opportunity to jump in. But because, if you look at Duke Patrick's shield, it goes down, up, still going up, continuing to follow, but Agrippa's pulled his sword back. Now Duke Patrick's opened the low shot. So this area here comes open. And if Agrippa can take advantage of it, but unfortunately, he's backing out because he knows that brutal offside is coming in, and it might have been coming a little low anyway. Duke Patrick throws the shield down for defense, but Agrippa whiffs, and Duke Patrick maintains his offense right into Agrippa's shield. What he's really trying to do is drive Agrippa back, keep him blind. I don't think he's like aiming for the middle of the shield with the thought it's going to land and kill his opponent. And here he lets Agrippa sort of settle up and rotate out. Now here's a place where we can't really see, but Agrippa was pretty close to the edge of the Eric. Duke Patrick could have continued to try to drive him into the edge of the Eric, at which point a hold would be called. That means stop for safety reasons. And Agrippa would have gotten a warning for running into the edge of the Eric, but Duke Patrick doesn't pursue him. Wow, 20 minutes and we're halfway done the first fight. Better stop talking so much. So you see a lot of the same stabbing, a lot of the same sort of crossbody chops from from Duke Patrick. A lot of sword blocking from Agrippa of the onside, the offside being guarded by the shield. You see a lot of the same feints. And again, constantly circling towards Patrick's sword side. Here we see another, this one is pretty close, right? Like we can see Agrippa's gone wide, he's throwing for that leg, and you can see the power. Duke Patrick's shield does not bend easily. It's a sturdy shield, and look at that. And the targeting, right on. It's just an inch above the knee, maybe 2. And now that Agrippa's slightly off balance and leaning to the right, Duke Patrick sees the opportunity to jump in, and look, here, Duke Patrick's movement is committed now. He could be going towards where Agrippa is. Look where he goes. He basically cuts off the circle because Agrippa's trying to keep him at range with jabs and thrusts. Patrick's trying to close that range while maintaining a super solid defense because basically it's like a flash KO, right? He gets one good straight to the face and he's done, right? So look where Patrick goes to cut the circle off. He changes direction, so now he's actually much closer to Agrippa, and he's also made it so that Agrippa can't recover his sword back in between him and Patrick. And it almost gets there. If you look, this shot, so close. And you can see the sword's almost bending in the air, it looks like. But you can see it just barely touches with the tip as Agrippa's backing out. So if he'd been able to close just a little more distance, or if Agrippa had been just a hair slower, that would have landed meatily. I should point out this is one of the reasons why it's sometimes good not to have a thrusting tip. One of the questions people might have is like, if Agrippa's sword allows you to stab and Duke Patrick's doesn't, why would you not have a stabbing sword? Well, to allow a sword to stab, you have to put foam on the tip. If Agrippa had been, say, 3-4 inches closer and Duke Patrick's sword had hit and was the same length, that foam on the very tip can make that hit land much softer. So without a thrusting tip, you lose the ability to stab, but you make it so that shots with the tip of your sword land much harder. So that's the trade-off there. Again, it wasn't quite there, but if he'd been 3 inches closer, that shot probably would have been good, but if it had a thrusting tip, it wouldn't have. So there's the trade-off. Okay, we'll take a look at that exchange because it's the first landed blow. All right, so Duke Patrick steps in, lightning fast offside, but honestly it's not going anywhere except for maybe Agrippa's arm. Agrippa still moves the shield a lot to block it, but he's still able to see. So he's moved the shield over, and at this point Agrippa's exposed his lead leg, but he's not blind. Meanwhile, Duke Patrick doesn't throw for the leg. Agrippa's following the basket of Patrick's sword, and instead of sort of just taking a passive defense, pushes his shield into Patrick's sword. Now, you're not allowed to shield punch someone. There's a chance that also touched Patrick's arm, but Patrick's sword is out in front. His basket is sticking out from the sword. So this is definitely sword or shield to weapon contact. It might have touched the elbow a bit, but really the rules are like you're not allowed to shield punch someone in the face or the body or the armpit or something like that. If you're bouncing off them a little bit while manipulating their weapon, that's totally fine. It happens all the time. Now, Agrippa drops his shield after this and throws the heavy offside. Really common center grip move. Patrick is familiar with it and blocks with the basket. You can see the power behind it, but Patrick moves with the power, gets his own shield out, and throws a really unexpected shot. We can't really see where it lands or how, but this looks like it's going to be a big shot with the front of the sword to the head. Like, to me, I would be like, oh, guard that. He manages to turn that into a wrap on the leg. I don't know if it's a little low, a little light, or, Agrippa's just not close enough to the blade when it lands for it to be good. Can't really see from here. But not a lot of guys can start from that sword position and end in that sword position. Now, meanwhile, Duke Patrick's shield is up near Agrippa's face. Agrippa's able to detect that the tip of that shield is up and out, and he can throw a shot right into the leg. So you can see that goes directly into Patrick's leg, right above the knee. So that's a legal shot. Now Agrippa's getting out. Duke Patrick has to throw across his own body, and meanwhile he's starting to take the leg shot, so he's not allowed to really walk anymore. So Patrick can't really go after him. Agrippa gets behind his shield and out of range. Patrick drops. I move the camera around a whole bunch. I apologize. And here we see, let's just watch a little bit of this at speed, and then we'll call it good for this first bout. So here we can see Agrippa doesn't change his stance a lot when he's fighting someone on their knees here. the sword tip comes forward a little bit, the shield leans forward a little bit, so it's angled towards his opponent who's down on the ground. We can't really see what Duke Patrick's doing. Again, I apologize for my camera work. What Agrippa's hoping to do is land a thrust, right? At this range, you can also potentially hit the arm, but hitting the legs again doesn't do anything. So he might be able to hit Duke Patrick in the arm, but he's going to have to get a little closer if he wants to hit him in the head or body. Oh, I apologize again. So there he manages to get that thrust. If we take a quick look at that thrust, it was neat, but we can barely catch it thanks to my crappy camera work. Alright, so if we look here, again, I apologize about the camera for the 75th time. But where Agrippa actually throws this is between Patrick's weapon arm and the shield. And you can see the weapon is already sitting sort of low, but it corkscrews, and Agrippa's basket ends up moving sort of forward and to his left in a diagonal to get the tip just around the edge of Patrick's shield and just past the inside of his arm, presumably hitting him somewhere around the face or neck. You can't really tell. And you can see at the end the thrust is pretty much straight in, but it doesn't start there. So it's sort of a corkscrew. It starts here, goes here, and my camera's moving at the same time, and ends there. Not great for drawing that on screen, but it's a good corkscrew thrust. It rotates from, say, 4 o'clock p.m. on a clock dial to, say, 7 o'clock p.m. on a clock dial, and then with laser precise targeting and the persistent risk of a feint or fake that'll end up throwing your shield somewhere while he stabs you somewhere else, it's a good move. All right, what I'm going to do at this point is pause, and then we'll look at the second fight. All right, moving on to the second bout here. We've got Agrippa is up 1 fight, and it's best 2 out of 3, so if he wins this match, that's crown. We see them in the same sort of positions. Agrippa's throwing offsides to keep honest, deep offside leg, again rotating out to the right. Patrick sort of inexorable approach. A lot of sort of 45-degree chops. Here we've got so there we got an attempted thrust by Agrippa. Patrick asked the marshals because he couldn't tell if it hit. Marshals gave their feedback, and the fight continues. Another offside, just to keep Duke Patrick honest. This time Agrippa's actually circling to the other side, and we've got Duke Patrick sort of attempting different shots. He's got a lot of different techniques and a lot of fakes that are difficult for me to pick up at speed. So when we go through it slow, I might be able to better describe what's going on. I'm going to move forward here because there's a lot of sort of facing off and a couple light shots, just keeping each other honest, while Agrippa swaps out to a different sword. So I talked to him about it. The first sword he had, the blade rotated inside the basket hilt on him, so basically this sword had a minor break issue. So we went back and grabbed another sword, actually a near identical sword, but I had made this one. So that's my sword now. But I had loaned it to him at the beginning of the day, and it is pretty much the same as his sword. I just made a different thrusting tip. It's got a different basket hilt, but very similar sword. Continuing on, the same square up, we've seen Duke Patrick now actually managing to inch a little closer. Agrippa again throwing that light offside. Again, I think that's really a threat to set up for a thrust. And again, Agrippa's now fading back or to the left instead of to the right like he was mostly in the first bout. Cool 5-shot combo. We'll go over that. I think that's the first time we see Duke Patrick give significant ground. I'm not sure if he's letting Agrippa out from the Erics or if he's trying to bait him a little closer. But we can see they're actually closer than they were for most of the first bout. Both of them with really fluid footwork at this point. They're not doing the sort of keep 1 foot forward. They're both walking, but they're doing so very carefully and with measure. And there we see the killing shot where I believe what Duke Patrick does is time Agrippa based on the combos that Agrippa had been throwing before. So let's go through sort of play by play like we did the first few passes. Here we see, again, as we go forward, Agrippa flicks out that offside. It's not really a threat, but you can see actually there's the thrust threat, and Patrick adjusts his shield to shut that down. We see that a bunch of times. Here, this is the first time we see what a lot of center grip fighters will do. To me, this looks like a familiar move. It's a deep leaning offside where plant the leg, lean over, often move the shield over a little bit to protect, get the body way down and throw a hard offside into the opponent's body or leg. In this case, it connects with Duke Patrick's shield as well as with his leg, so it probably didn't deliver enough power into the leg to be a good blow. But it's the first time we sort of see this, and if we look at the position, you can see that Agrippa's had to move his shield down a little bit to be able to get that shot through. I think if it was a little bit smaller center grip shield, he wouldn't have had to move it that far out of the way, but because it's quite tall, he's had to go into that position, which leaves him a bit exposed, but it's a good long-range attack. And if Duke Patrick hadn't gotten his shield over, obviously that would have taken the leg. Now, that onside recovery, that offside recovery, where Agrippa's got his sword hanging here, is what's protecting him from the counter shot from Duke Patrick. At this point, if Duke Patrick is to throw really quickly low or to drive forward hard, if we look at the alignment of Agrippa's base, he might be able to knock Agrippa over. That wouldn't really do him a lot of good, but if he can send him stumbling a little bit, it might help. Or he can try shooting for this opening here. The last thing he could do is count on Agrippa moving his defense over this way and creating an opening up here, right? So Duke Patrick's looking, he's got his head way out because he knows he can see Agrippa's sword. There's not a really good threat from there. The only potential thing, and I would never put this past Agrippa's ability to do, he might be able to rotate this sword this way and stab straight down here. I wouldn't be able to do it, but potentially he could. So I would be a little worried about that. And that's one of the things about fighting his grace is you always need to be prepared for all sorts of unexpected thrusts. However, he does the same sort of recovery that I would see. Duke Patrick, instead of throwing for the leg here, covers and defends. He's still holding off on the shot. I believe he could have ripped Agrippa's leg at this point, but maybe Agrippa would have dropped his shield in time. And now it looks to me as though Duke Patrick is setting up for a slot shot that drops straight in here. That's what it looks like to me, but instead of throwing that shot in, he's sort of guarding and protecting this whole time. So Duke Patrick's definitely got a game plan here. I haven't picked up on what it is. And if we go back just a little bit more, this is one spot where if Duke Patrick had a thrusting tip, I think Agrippa would have had to adjust his defense because he's wide open to a thrust right now, but he knows Duke Patrick can't thrust him. Right here we see a lot of crosses. So as Duke Patrick closes in again, he's now got his shield on Agrippa's shield a little bit because Duke Patrick's got the arm strap. His shield is more powerful, so he could do a shield hook or shield press. But Agrippa uses his height to try to throw the high wrap, and Duke Patrick decides to use his shield to block it. He might be leaving his sword there as a double block. It's a little unclear to me. And then Duke Patrick tries to come up over high as well. So basically he's thinking, Agrippa's sword just came through this space. He's going to have to recover through that space. That's going to give me an opening, so I'm going to throw through the same space. But Agrippa's sword gets back and blocks in time. Agrippa keeps his shield up against Duke Patrick's sword to offer some space. He's leaning back a little bit, and he throws, as he drops his shield, he throws his sword where his shield was, which is what protects him from Duke Patrick's shot. I don't know if Agrippa was hoping that Duke Patrick's head would be there, or if he was like, best defense is a good offense here, I'm going to throw into that opening. Duke Patrick is hoping to get under that. You can see he's looking, he's trying to get into Agrippa's body or armpit, maybe take the arm. But between the sword hitting his and the shield there's enough defense. Okay, there's that thrust again. You know, it's when we're able to go frame by frame, it's a little easier to look at things. When things happen super fast, again, if you look at speed, I'll dare you to watch this thrust at speed while blinking, moving, and running. That's what, just a couple frames, right? I'm recording at 60 frames a second, so, you know, with video analysis, we get a little bit better view than maybe the marshals do or whatnot. But this is what makes Agrippa so dangerous. The sword's, I've finished going backwards. The sword's up. Sword's down. And we can see the sword hits the face here. Now that's just a moment, and we don't know necessarily, it might have skipped away from the camera. Little hard to tell, but you look at all that motion, and of course, Duke Patrick's got to move down a little bit to block against the body thrust and against the leg. You can see he's lifting his leg behind the guard. You've got to respond. And then we see it looks like it catches just the edge of the face. If it had caught the helm, a little bit different calibration. But this is one of those places where I think quite understandably Duke Patrick's like, my shield, my sword, your sword, it was all there. It was a moment. And he asks, I'm not sure. Agrippa doesn't sound super sure. Asks the marshals, which is the right thing to do. You talk to your opponent, you talk to the marshal. I whisper into the camera, ask the marshals. And the marshal does their best. The marshal says, hey, from what I saw, it looked like you blocked it with your shield. It, in my opinion, is no better than anyone else's, but since you asked, that's what it looked like. Fight continues just as it should. There's that offside again. Duke Patrick throws another offside of his own, not really a threat. Really just trying to close range, and here we see the same thing where when Patrick manages to get in and cuts off the circle, so he's closing range, closing range, closing range. They're both defending really well. They're looking for openings. Neither of them are really giving each other openings. Duke Patrick throws for that leg because he sees it open. Agrippa barely gets his shield on it, you can see. Now he's in for the kill. Throws hard into that shield because, again, big shield, not a lot of opportunities. So he's hoping that's going to give him something to throw at. Agrippa manages to keep the shield in the way to catch that offside follow-up. And Agrippa's been able to use his foot speed and longer legs to get out after that combo. And again, really it's when Duke Patrick cuts off the corner, basically. When Agrippa's circling to the outside, Duke Patrick cuts a shorter line to the inside to be able to catch up to him without running and exposing himself. All right, here's that period where they need to replace the sword. Here we're in slow motion. Again, relatively closer range than we've seen for the first bout, but second one, there's that same offside again, just keep you honest. The threat of the thrust is there, right? That first little pop is just to confuse the defense. It's the thrust that comes after that's the real threat. Actually, let's take this out of slow motion because there's a bit of this. So that's that pop that's the real threat. Now Agrippa's also fast enough that he can afford to move his sword around and leave his head open because Duke Patrick's got a really quick ability to throw an offside, really quick onside. You see him throw a lot of big shots, but he's got fast, quick shots as well to the face. And Agrippa's counting on his defense to be able to shut that down and range. Let's look at that 5-shot combo, which is kind of neat. A lot of it's done with arm. None of it lands anyway. Maybe Agrippa would power harder if it looked like they were going to land. But it's also very safe at the distance he's throwing. So there's the offside to the shield. Again, not a real shot. Just seeing what opens up. Convert into a slot. Now that'll often look like it's converting into a snapshot, but what he's done is rolled it over further, so it's almost vertical. Duke Patrick easily picks that up with a double block. Now the real threat, I've moved you twice, I'm going to try to stab. Duke Patrick moves the shield. You see he doesn't move the sword much, but he's starting to take a step back because he recognizes threat at this point. And he's not in a good position to, say, chop Agrippa in the arm or anything like that. And then there's this real quick, straight down, again, not a real shot into the shield, just sort of a threat, pop it. And the big lean for the leg shot, and it sounded like Duke Patrick picked that up with his shield tip. Now at this point, it's only the fact, I think, that that Duke Patrick is moving away that stops him from throwing a counter slot shot. So Duke Patrick is moving away, which helps with his defense on this. I think if he wasn't stepping back here, he could have countered Agrippa, and Agrippa would have really had to move his shield to defend himself, because at this point now, the fifth blow, he's exposed. Yeah. Okay, much closer now. Still not quite within Duke Patrick's good killing range, though. Now we've seen a offside thrust, thrust, thrust. That combo a few times, that timing. And I think that's exactly what Duke Patrick did, is he said, okay, you've done this sort of pop, pop, that timing. It's different thrusts, it's different opening shots, but it's a first thing that isn't really a threat. It's there to hit the shield, it's there to move my sword closer to you. It disguises the initial part of the motion. After the sword bounces back, you don't know where it's going to go, but I do, right? So what Duke Patrick does, if we watch this, I think it's a very tactical move. I'm going to zoom real close here. The first shot comes forward, again, not a real threat. Duke Patrick moves just a little bit to block it. You see, now he's decided, you can even see him move into it. Look, he's moving forward into that shot. Doesn't back up, times it, and does a block with a shield and throws at the exact same time. And because Agrippa has been able to go pop, pop with impunity at this point, he's not necessarily expecting to have to defend at the same time, so the shield is just a hair slow. So now, it is 1-1. The third match is for all the marbles, and will determine who the next king will be come coronation. Time for the third and final round of this showdown. Again, we'll watch it at speed, then we'll go over it in detail. Closing to similar range, same guards, no big changes. Patrick sword leg forward, Agrippa sword leg back. Closer now. Different offside, a little bit further overhead. Double pump and thrust. So let's take a look at that. Let's take a look at that last move there. So one thing to point out is, we could go back over the video, but I don't remember seeing a double pump up until this point. Remember, it's been single pump thrust, or single hit thrust, and that's how Duke Patrick timed that last fight. So let's watch this one in slow motion. So first off, if we break it down, and I can't necessarily speak for Duke Agrippa, but I think there's a few things going on here. First, let's take a look at the feet. It is masked under a step forward. So the motion starts, his back leg is stepping forward, then the front leg steps, and it opens like an offside shot, right? So the back leg crept forward to give a little extra range without moving the body. Then the forward foot moved forward, and the blow is coming in here. It looks like it's going to potentially, bounce off of Patrick's sword if it's an offside to the head here. Patrick's aware that it's definitely not going to be. What Agrippa's going to do is pull the tip of the sword inside Patrick's blade to clear past the blade as a defense and thrust. So the shield and sword come forward. Now Agrippa's dropping the blade down below the shield edge to hide it. drops down, boom. And at this point, he's now dropped his hip. His hip is cocked, and Patrick is continuing to step in. There's not a lot of space. Notice there's not a ton of distance between Patrick's shield and the tip of Agrippa's sword. So there's not a lot of room for Agrippa to move with this. But Patrick's shield comes down, the sword's up to guard, and Agrippa right over the top edge of the shield. Just by a factor of inches, and Duke Patrick is still stepping into it. So again, if we break that down, we see a little bit of a hidden step. Actually, Agrippa's body's coming up, so Duke Patrick can definitely see it. The step forward feint with an offside. Now it's also a stab feint. Drop down hard. Patrick's shield starts to go down, and he's stepping forward at the same time. So because he's on the move, it's a little harder to defend. His sword stays high, his shield goes down, and we're going to see there's very little room. We're talking less than an inch between the top of Patrick's shield and Agrippa's sword. Agrippa's sword's also angled out, and his elbow is cocked away from us, so you can see the back blade of the sword. Actually, that's my sword. My sword is is angled so that the back blade is pointed towards us, and what he's done is he's threaded underneath Patrick's sword and above his shield for the face thrust. And like that, we have two new princes for the Kingdom of Caid. What an incredible set of fights between these two fighters. I will say that both of them managed to defeat me in the previous 2 rounds. So not only do I have a great deal of admiration for the fights they have, but I was blown away by the fights they gave me. Shows me so much about the top end game. I have no doubt Agrippa is undisputed the victor of the day, and Duke Patrick is undisputed deserved to be the last person to test him. Both awesome fighters. I'm very happy with my losses to them. As happy as you get to be. And my consort was as well. So thank you for taking a look at this video. I know we went over it in pretty excruciating detail. I would love to get feedback from you on whether you would like to see less detail or more detail, or if things are just right. Are we in the Goldilocks zone here? Also, I'm more than happy to do reviews by request. It doesn't have to be SCA Heavy Combat. Could be Rapier, could be ACL, HNB, IMCF, HEMA, WMA, period pugilism. I can't promise I'll know everything about those other martial activities, but I will do my best to do a thoughtful analysis of them, even if it's a somewhat uninformed one. So go ahead and leave comments if you don't mind letting me know if I've hit the right balance of duration and detail. Let me know in the comments if there's another video if you'd like me to take a look at, or if you have any other feedback. I'd really like to hear it. Cheers.